Good afternoon, everybody. This is Brian Tully. Thank you for joining us for our Wednesday webinar, where we'll be talking about Medicaid, the good, the bad, and the ugly. Like always, though, we'll give it a minute or two for folks to log in, and I'll be back. Hello, everybody. We're going to get started momentarily. Here we go. And again, my name is Brian Tully. Thank you for joining me. We try to get out here at least once a month and share what's going on as far as elder care, elder law, estate planning issues. And today is going to be about Medicaid. Often a big draw for people because there's a lot of misinformation out there. And what we'll talk about today is the good part of it, the bad part of it, and the reality, which is the potential ugly part of it. I first did a webinar with a title like this 5 years ago when New York was starting to deal with look back periods and changes to the community Medicaid program. So we're going to spend some time on that today and give a little bit of an update, which isn't much of an update, but I'll be happy to share the concerns and the reasons that we need to be aware of the risks and the issues out there. Like always, if you have questions, I'll be happy to answer them at the end of the webinar. Just go to the chat box, chat or the Q&A, and I can answer. And I'll assume that you can see me and hear me. If not, just raise your hand or let me know through the chat box or the Q&A box that you can see me and or can't hear me. But we'll get started, okay? Now, while I'm setting this up, I hope everybody's enjoyed their summer, which was an odd one, right? It was a lot of rain in the beginning, and then now all of a sudden it's feeling like September really fast, really fast. Let me share my screen again. All right, so we got the PowerPoint back up there. We'll get started. Again, if you can't see the PowerPoint, let me know, please. And what we'll do is, like always, again, is we have this recorded and we'll get it posted up on our website and our YouTube, if not by the end of the day, by tomorrow morning. So the website is tullylawgroup.com. We have all of the webinars we've been doing for the last 5+ years up there. So you could always learn a little bit more about the topics I'm talking about. We go into a little more depth, Medicaid-wise, asset protection-wise, estate planning-wise. There's a lot more information on the website about that, tullylawgroup.com. And of course, we offer free consultations if you want a little more detailed information and see how we can help your specific situation. Okay, so when we look at the good, the bad, and the ugly, just to kind of start it off, what we're looking at is Medicaid is, and I tend to make the assumption for people that are joining us because they're familiar with it. However, some of you might be joining us for the first time. So we're going to talk a little bit of background, but the big picture is that Medicaid is out there to assist us with our long-term care needs. And it has a community program, which is a home care based program. So services there are in the community, either in the home or in some assisted livings. And then Medicaid, long-term care Medicaid, also has a chronic care program, which is for nursing homes. And again, today's focus will primarily be on the community Medicaid program. So when we look at the good, the bad, and the ugly, the reality is that there is a good part to Medicaid. And it's a godsend for many, many people. And that is at the end of the road, as long as everything is done properly, like we've been doing for 27 years, the care will actually be paid for, whether it's community-based or nursing home-based. And that is a big plus for a lot of families, especially when economy things or economy issues are tight, cost of living is expensive, and so is long-term care. So to get that care paid for, again, is a home run. Now, the bad part, the way I look at it, the bad part is what you have to go through to get Medicaid to actually help and pay for the home care or the nursing home care. So that's the application process. There's always an eligibility process, making the person eligible. Then there is the application process. And then in the home care world, there are the care assessments. And that's what I'm referring to when I say the application. So from beginning to end, it's approximately 4 months when we're involved. Generally, we can break that 4 months into 3 different segments or phases. The first phase would be 4 to 6 weeks, generally, for the applicant to be made eligible, and for the family to get us all of the documentation that's needed so that we can complete the application and submit it. Then once we have all the information, we finalize the application, we do in fact file it, and we're looking at about 4 weeks, 5 weeks there before we actually get an approval. Our Medicaid team is, I will humbly say, second to none. We've been very fortunate in that the applications all of our applications have been approved. We haven't had a denial. I reframe that. We haven't had an appeal on a single Medicaid application in the last 4 years. So that means that all of our applications are being approved without having to go into appeals. So that's valuable information when you're considering who's going to help you through this process. But in the community home care world, the application isn't over once we have the approval. You then get into these care assessments, which New York started 10 plus years ago, where nurses from the state and other entities may come in to evaluate your loved one, the applicant. And the way we operate is a very unique way. It's what's called life care planning. And we always have one of our care coordinators there during those assessments. That way we can make sure your loved one is getting heard and making sure that the nurse from the state is seeing all of the needs that actually exist, so that we not only get into the program, but we get the most hours of care possible in the home environment. So all of that goes into the application process, generally 4 months. We've had some families go 6, 7, 8 months. That's unfortunate because they're not getting us, unfortunately, all of the documents that are needed for the application. So the process can be a bumpy one. All right. And I've talked to many, many families about this before, during, and after, and it is a bumpy ride. We do all we can to hold your hand and bring you through it as smooth as possible. But it can be complicated. All right. Now, after the good and the bad, we get into the ugly part. And the ugly part is that New York State is potentially making some changes to the community Medicaid program. And what I can also land in here is the bigger picture of potential Medicaid changes in the larger landscape. The unfortunate reality of that is, though, in the bigger picture on the federal national level, is we don't have all those details yet. But there is going to be some tightening of the belt probably over the next 6 or 12 months. We just don't know what that's going to look like yet. And I don't want to be a sky is falling type of person, but there are obviously some rumblings, and people have read the headlines as well. We just don't know what the tightening of the belt is going to look like. Okay. So what I'll talk about today as far as changes is what we are aware of, which is on a state level. Okay. So there, big picture, good, bad, and ugly about Medicaid. Now, little more background information for those that are joining us for the first time. We have close to 100 people registered for this webinar, and we always have a handful of regular people that join us, and then a larger, gratefully, group of people that are with us for the first time. So I always like to give a little bit of a background about why we're talking about this. So in again, big picture, mile high perspective, there are two types of care that we can receive, particularly as we get older. There's what's called medical care, and that's going to be doctors and hospitals and ERs, rehabilitation centers for physical therapy, etc. And then the other type of care is what's called long-term care. And that's more what people think of when they think of nursing homes or they think of custodial care. Long-term care in general is defined by what's called the activities of daily living. It's in essence, are we able to live independently? And it revolves around these, again, ADLs, activities of daily living, which I'll talk about in a little bit. And if we're performing our activities of daily living, such as walking and bathing and toileting, then we're independent, we're on our own. But if we need assistance with those independent activities, that's when we fall into this world of long-term care. And when we're in that world of long-term care, oftentimes our family can help us in the beginning. It's what I call informal care. And a spouse or a child, they can stop by, they can assist with this or assist with that. But quite often we get to a point where the care has to become more formal. And what that means is we need to start hiring people. And the reality is hiring and paying for long-term care is a very, very expensive undertaking. And why is it an issue for many people? Well, because you're looking at significant costs. And again, I shared in the beginning that I worked on a similar presentation 5 years ago when we were in COVID. But unfortunately, the rates that I'm going to show you right now as to what long-term care actually costs, it's gone up close to 40%, 50%. So for example, to have an aide come into the home, back then, 5 years ago, we were about $20 an hour, $25 an hour. We are now at $35 to $45 an hour for a licensed home care aide to come in and help with those activities of daily living. And depending where you are, it may be as high as $45 an hour. You start looking at what that means daily. Well, generally a home care agency is going to have a minimum of 6 hours. Sometimes it could be a little lower, but generally it's a 6-hour minimum. So $35 at 6 hours is $210 a day. We've also had some clients that require literal 24 hours a day care. So there are aides rotating 12-hour shifts. And when that happens, you're paying for 24 hours in the day. And that could be at least $500 a day. We've had clients before they've engaged us at $16,000 and $17,000 a month out of pocket. So talk about bad and ugly. That's it. So the reality is home care can be $3,000, $4,000, $5,000, $6,000 a month to start. And again, I put in 15,000 as a high point, but we have seen $16,000 and $17,000. Now, you add that up annually, and when I talk with people every single week, you got to realize there's a lot more to it than just paying for the aid. So home care could be about $100,000 a year at the low end, and it could be as high as over $150,000, $170,000 per year, depending on how much care is actually needed. So paying for that out of pocket is something that not many families can do. And even if you did have the funds, chances are it's not something that you're comfortable in doing, especially when there are resources and programs available to assist. Not everybody stays at home. Some people go assisted living, and those are the Sunrise facilities, the Bristols, the Atrias, some of the independent ones you see, the Arbors, Amber Court. Those have monthly rates. It's room and board, and the care is usually on top. But monthly speaking monthly, you're looking $5,000, $10,000, sometimes $12,000 a month, which could easily hit over $60,000 a year to close to $150,000 a year, and often the care is on top of that. It's rare, but there's a facility or two out there that actually have an all-inclusive type of situation where the rent includes some care. But again, if that's what's needed, then we can certainly help point you in that direction. Now, the real bad situation for on a lot of levels, I'll say emotionally, I'll say personally, I'll say medically, financially, of course, is the skilled nursing facility or the nursing home. Daily, oh, and there's a typo there. It's not 7,000 a day. I apologize for that. We have seen 700 a day, so we have an extra zero in there. But we've seen anywhere from 14 monthly, 14,000 a month, up to $21,000 a month. Okay, so it's a big window, but that's what we're looking at when we're generally talking about nursing home care on Long Island. Again, when you're looking at this on an annual number, $100,000, $200,000, $250,000 to pay for a nursing home, that's not something that most people can do. So there needs to be some type of assistance, and gratefully there is. Okay, so the reason we are talking about this is because Medicaid is very, very helpful to most people that apply for it. And the reality is, again, there's this good aspect to it in that once we go through the community Medicaid application process or the chronic care Medicaid application process, the good part is home health care can be paid for. Some assisted livings can be paid for. It's what's called the ALP, the assisted living program. Adult daycare can be paid for. And not only that, but managed long-term care agencies, they actually pay for a lot more. You could be looking at transportation, you could be looking at supplies. So there are significant benefits. Good comes out of this Medicaid program, especially in the community. And then financially, they'll pay for the nursing home. So again, I don't think many people are going to question that, but that's what we're looking at. That is how it is beneficial for us. Now, the bad part, as I alluded to in the beginning, is going through this approximate 4-month window. To give you some of the highlights. So we as a law firm, there's an initial consultation. We will sit and meet with the family, learn about the needs. Again, we're doing this 8, 10, 12 times a week for families. We're learning about the needs. We're learning about the finances. We're learning about the income. We're looking at what level of care is appropriate, what type of support is in the community. How do we keep them at home? How do we keep them with their spouse? A lot goes into establishing the plan and the direction that we're going to go in. Sometimes a nursing home is necessary. So again, we'll evaluate that, make that decision with the family if that's what's needed and safest. But when we're engaged and start looking at actually applying for Medicaid and eligibility, there's a lot of financial records that are necessary. There's a lot of personal and biographical information that's necessary. And if it's a married couple, and even if one spouse is the applicant, we need it for both spouses. So we have a 5-page checklist of everything that, and we'll go through it with you. Our Medicaid team will go through it with you. And it's going to be everything we need before we could put the application together. Okay, so this quite often is where we run into greater delays than the 4 months. If children or spouse is having a hard time getting us the documents that are needed, we'll help. We've even gone to people's houses. We've gone to people's banks with them. It's not something we do all the time, but we do if we have to. And the reason being is because sometimes if we're working with an 80, 85-year-old spouse who needs the Medicaid assistance for their declining spouse, we're going to help as much as we can. And that 5-page checklist, sometimes we've got clients that are very organized and they get it all put together and they get it to us very quickly. Other times it can take 2, 4, 6, 8, 10 weeks to put together the documentation that's needed. And the way we operate is we want you dropping everything off piecemeal. We want piecemeal, not 1 month at a time, but in chunks. That way we can review and get back in touch with you and say, thank you for giving us A, B, and C, but as you know, we still need D, E, and F. And that'll be done by email, it'll be done by phone call. And so it's all in writing and we'll hold your hand through the process. But locating some documents sometimes takes the family a little bit longer. So again, this is part of the bad part, but it's necessary for the application. Once the application is actually filed, there's going to be some back and forth. It's what I call the dance. We are at this point where we've been doing this for so long that we are strategically completing our applications, and I'll leave it at that. And what that means is we are giving what is needed for the approval as efficiently as possible. And however, there may be still requests from Medicaid for more information. So it's that second month in the process, we're getting the application filed. We'll get what's called a penned letter, what's pending, and the family will get it. And it could be 3, 4 things, or it can be simply, explain this deposit or explain this check transaction and provide documentation on it. We want our applications as complete as possible before we file them. That's how we get the approvals quickly, and that's how we avoid the appeals that I mentioned earlier. So expect this type of back and forth. It's not all finished once you get us everything on the checklist. And it's continual. During the application, if you've got 4 bank accounts, we still need monthly bank statements, monthly, until we have the approval, okay? And then, of course, once your loved one is actually on Medicaid benefits, every 12 months or so, there's another recertification application. So it doesn't go away, and neither do we. We'll be there to help with all that if you want us to be. Another bad part of this, as I've referenced already, is this 4 months. So that 4 months could be 5 months, it could be 6 months, it could be 8 months, depending on the family's ability to get us the documentations and the family's ability to do what we need to do to make the loved one eligible. Again, we will do everything in our power to help. We will be as specific and express as much detail and support that's needed to get over that finish line so we can have the application completed and filed. But depending on which avenue we're taking, if it's community Medicaid, you're going to be paying for that care out of pocket until Medicaid is approved and those assessments are completed and the aid can start. So there are interim costs during this 4-month window. And I'll stick with the 4 months from now on because the vast majority of our clients are done in 4 months. So home care has that problem. There was a time years ago where we'd actually be able to pursue reimbursement for care paid for out of pocket after the application was filed, but that has gone away. So that doesn't happen anymore. When you're looking at a nursing home situation, though, it's a little bit different. Again, we don't want nursing home situations unless it's necessary and the safest alternative and option. But if the loved one applicant for Medicaid is actually eligible already, meaning there's no penalties or look back period, and I'll explain what that means briefly. But if we're already eligible under the asset threshold, which is roughly $32,000, if we're under that $32,000 asset threshold, then that nursing home will sit there and wait to get paid. All right, so you don't have to pay for the nursing home. That's actually a good part of this. So what we're looking at is if rehab stops, June 15th, there may be an open bill to pay for the rest of June. There may not be, depends on the assets and the eligibility. But then during the application process, July, August, September, perhaps, there's no bill being paid by the family. The nursing facility will sit there and wait until we actually have the approval, and then they get paid by the Medicaid program. So that is a positive thing in a nursing home situation. But in home care, you're paying out of pocket. I mentioned this look back period. We'll talk about it a little bit more in a couple of slides, okay? Another bad aspect to Medicaid is that we're going to the government and asking them to pay for your loved one's care. The reality there is they don't have to agree or they don't have to approve if the application is not done properly, if the person is not eligible. So there is a potential for a denial and there is a potential for an appeal. An appeal is when we've applied and there's a denial and we want to try to keep that original application date. Then you can appeal. As I've shared, we haven't had appeals in years over here, and that's just because of our thorough process and our Medicaid department. It's our pleasure to help families through this process, although it's not a pleasurable process. Okay, so the other way to look at this is, and to talk specifically, getting into some of the changes, the ugly aspect of community Medicaid. This all started back in 2020 when I first did this webinar. So back in 2020, there was a whole host of changes that were signed into law by Governor Cuomo just as the pandemic was starting. And since the pandemic ramped up, those changes were never implemented for the most part. There have been slight changes implemented over the last 5 years that don't require too much of an overhaul. I'll give you, we'll talk about one of the ones that is actually starting next week. Okay, that's one of the reasons I wanted to get this webinar out there. So again, these changes that are happening on the state level with New York Medicaid. So what's going to be impacted? Well, you're looking at community-based long-term care services. That's the home care aid coming in. You're looking at private duty nursing. There are some Medicaid programs that cover that, not a lot. 98% of home care programs, home care families are working with home care aides. The nursing program is a different program in that it's harder to get into under specific circumstances. Personal care services are going to be impacted, as well as the assisted living program, which is the one I mentioned earlier, where Medicaid will help with the rent at some assisted living facilities. And consumer directed, which you may be aware of, that is a part of community Medicaid, so that will also be impacted. Consumer directed is where you're actually able to select your own aides. So the family, if you will, that is the consumer, and they're going to be able to direct their own care. In that regard, again, they're hiring their own aides and having their own backup people versus using an agency. Sometimes it's better for the family this way, sometimes it's not. It's all a part of the analysis and the advice as we move forward. But as we talk about the ugly part, specifically, there's two parts I'm going to talk about today. There is this idea of a 30-month look-back period. Again, this was all of the rage, if you will, for the last 5 years, especially back in 2020, 2021, and 2022. And then New York State put it on the back burner. However, it's still on the back burner, and I would argue maybe even getting closer to the front burner. Okay, so each year we're fortunate enough to do a webinar with the director for Suffolk County Community Medicaid. His name is Jim Sluter. And we were kind enough, Jim was kind enough to join us again this past April and to talk about this. The unfortunate reality is that we are still dealing with an unknown, okay? What we do know is that the 30-month look back for community Medicaid is not happening in 2025. But the door was left open in that interview for it to be 2026 or 2027, or perhaps never. All right, but I don't like playing that game because I want our clients to be prepared and planned and protected so that in case New York State makes the changes, our families are all taken care of. All right, so that's what we're after. Now, a look back period, just to kind of give you this background information. There's one look back period in New York as of now, and that's for nursing homes, okay? And it's a 5-year look back. And probably once a week, I'll get the question from a potential client, isn't it 7 years or isn't it 10 years? And the answer is no. It's a 5-year look back, and gratefully, it's only for nursing homes, okay? So 5 years, nursing home, Medicaid only. So what's the purpose of the look back? Well, the look back period is, we're going to Medicaid to say we want you to pay for dad in a nursing home. And they have the right to say, well, how did dad become eligible? Where did his money go? Where did his house go? And if it was protected by giving it to an irrevocable trust or giving it to children, then there can be a penalty if that transfer, if that gifting, if that asset protection occurred within the 5 years of the application date of when we want Medicaid to pay. Okay, so I'll give you an example. Let's say mom and dad wrote a check to their son Stephen back in 2023 for $150,000. Okay, and dad needs a nursing home in 2025, August of 2025. So there would be a 5-year review, a 5-year look back from August of 2025 back to the summer of 2020, literally a 5-year review. And what Medicaid is looking for, what we are looking for first, so we know what we're getting into, is any types of gifts or asset protection that can trigger a penalty. So Medicaid will say every 15,000, and I use round numbers just so the math is easier for everybody, for every $15,000 on Long Island that is gifted or protected during the 5-year look back, Medicaid will penalize that person and not pay for the nursing home for 1 month. So again, every $15,000 cash or value in a house that is protected, Medicaid won't pay for the nursing home for 1 month. All right. So my example where parents gave their son Stephen $150,000 2 years ago, you're going to have that $150,000 divided by that $15,000, what's called the regional rate of care. And Medicaid will now penalize dad for 10 months. 150,000 divided by 15,000 regional rate of care gives us the number 10. That is the penalty. That is the time frame in which Medicaid will not pay for dad's nursing home, which can be devastating for mom because typical Long Islander, you're not going to be sitting on 150 or 10 months. You're not going to be sitting on $200,000 that you could just spend freely and not worry about it. Okay. So the planning and the protection ideally is done when folks are in their 60s, depending on health, it could be earlier. But we get the planning done, we get the protection done, typically utilize what's called an irrevocable asset protection trust, and we get it done. The family goes and lives their life for the next 5 years, and hopefully they're still young enough and healthy enough, and everything's good. When we protect something, it starts the 5-year clock. And when we get through the 5 years, then it's fully protected, okay? So that's nursing homes. There is no similar look back period yet for home care or community Medicaid services. This is what Governor Cuomo signed into law back in 2020 was the implementation, or the, let me use the right word, was the start of a 30-month, 2.5 years, 30-month look back period for community Medicaid services. It hasn't started yet. And that's a good thing, which means we still have time. So if you're out there and you haven't undertaken your protection yet, or you haven't undertaken your Medicaid services application yet, you need to do it before the law changes officially, before this is implemented. Now, we don't know when it's going to be implemented, but again, we've heard it our whole lives. You're better off being safe than sorry. Okay. So if you have questions about that, I'll be happy to answer that in the chat or the Q&A box later. But this is the most ugliest part of the community Medicaid changes that, again, we're waiting to happen. And we're trying to get our clients protected as soon as possible so that we can start, and this is important, if we're sitting with a couple, and again, we do it frequently, and we're funding or putting their home into an irrevocable asset protection trust, the good news is if that's done in August, that will start both look back periods, the 5-year and the potential 2.5 year, even though the 2.5 year isn't officially started yet. Okay. So the sooner you protect, the sooner you can start both of the clocks. Okay. But as I've shared, we don't know when that's going to happen. Okay. If I had a bet, do I think it'll start at some point? I do. I do think it'll start at some point. New York has a lot of things going on right now, and there's some changes they may not get to, but I think they will get to this one eventually. I just don't know when. Okay. So another ugly component when we're talking about community-based Medicaid, and this is the one that actually starts next week. So up until, well, I should say, since, let's say 10, 12 years ago, since we've been doing these care assessments and focusing on these, very specifically on these activities of daily living, there was always a care need to get into the community program. But again, it's been highlighted significantly over the last 10 to 12 years because of these assessments that have been happening. So what starts next week, September 1st, is that to get into the typical community Medicaid aid program, we're going to have to prove that your loved one needs assistance with more than two. And if we look at regular math, although that sounds a little odd, more than two, that means three or more. So three or more activities of daily living must be proven in order to get into the community Medicaid program, whereas it was just two. So they've raised the threshold, they've made it a little more difficult, a little more complicated. They've made it more of a reason to have an advocate on your side, which is what we do for every single family. So when we're working with a community Medicaid family, what we call life care planning, again, there'll be an experienced advocate there with your loved one to make sure we get in the program, prove the amount of ADLs that are needed so we can get the most amount of care. We've had people call and walk in the door here where they worked with a law firm that didn't have the advocate. They worked with a law firm that didn't go to the assessments. They just did the paper application. And then the care assessments came along and they got approved for 5 hours. May sound okay, but agencies are understaffed and agencies are not going to jump on a 5-hour case necessarily. They want the higher hour cases. So getting the case staffed becomes another issue during the application process, and it's harder to do it if you don't have a high enough award of hours, which is what we specialize in. Okay, so yes, this is real and it's happening next week. Let me recap and share all of the activities of daily living so you know them moving forward. And simply, it's what we do every morning. So the first thing we do, right, we get out of bed, apart from grabbing our phone, is we get out of bed. So that it's what's called transferring. So getting out of bed or getting out of a chair is called transferring. That's the first activity of daily living. Then we generally walk to the bathroom, we toilet, we bathe, we dress, we groom, and we eat. So if we're doing all 7 of these independently, fine, no long-term care need. But if we have a walker, if we're falling, if we need a hand getting out of bed, if we can't cut our food, if we're not dressing appropriately, if we're not brushing our teeth, if we're not bathing with soap and water, then we have independence issues, then we have ADL issues, and now we have a long-term care need. And then the issue becomes, how do we pay for it, okay? And that's one of the reasons that we exist, to help families through the entire process. A good note, not to be confusing when we're talking about the bad and the ugly, but there is a silver lining here, in that if somebody is dealing with an Alzheimer's or a dementia diagnosis, that can mean the care need is more on supervision than on hands-on help. So gratefully, there's a change that says that they will lower the ADL requirement if there is that dementia or ADL diagnosis, okay? And that can also open the door to other programs, what's called NHTD and so forth, which helps families very much so with more of a cognitive decline. So with all this being said, folks, and I've alluded to it twice so far, timing matters. And let me share how and why. What we're looking at is, if you're healthy still, you want to get the asset protection going as soon as possible so you can start both of those clocks, those look-back clocks, ticking away. The other way that it's important that you get moving is if you actually have a care need. Your loved one, if you're starting to notice a long-term care need, you want to get into the program, you want to take action and get into the program before those look-back periods, or the look-back period begins for community services. All right, again, we have a little bit of time on that, but do not wait. Time flies, we know that. So again, whether you're healthy or dealing with a long-term care need, there is a need for action. There's a need for you to get your ducks in a row and get the planning and protection done, or get into the Medicaid program for the services, which does not only save money, but it also, when you're working with a firm like ours, it provides the support. And you're going to be looking at a caregiver having a law firm and care coordinators, either a nurse or a social worker or a case manager, helping with care decisions, helping with, is it time for assisted living? Is it time for nursing home? Is it time for hospice? We're there for all of those questions and answers and issues. We've been blessed to help families for 3, 5, 9 years. I think the longest one, the gentleman passed away last year, was 13 years we helped that family. And we take honor in that because we're not providing a transaction. We're not here just to do paperwork and get paid and move on. When we enter into an engagement and we're assisting you, we're with you for a full year, and then you can choose to keep us on board year after year after year. So you're not alone, all right? And that's one of the most important things, if I can convey through this webinar, is that aging is not an easy process for the caregiver or for the loved one. And the more support that you can get, the more expertise, the more advice, the more direction you can have, the less stress there is and the less that's on your shoulders. The most important thing to do is to avoid a crisis. And if you've seen these webinars before, you've heard me say this. When you have a crisis, there's always less options available to you. There's always more cost and there's always more stress. Crises are bad. Planning in advance, taking care of this before the crisis, again, more options, less stress, and usually less cost, okay? Because we're not putting out fires, all right? To kind of wrap it up, the way that we do this is again, I've used the phrase life care planning. We're the only firm that provides that level of service, is we focus on the legal issues, the financial issues, and the care issues. That's the unique part. And we're sitting with families, we're focusing on a goal of protecting the most assets. We're focusing on a goal of getting the care paid for. And again, rather uniquely, we're focusing on a goal and able to deliver on that goal of making sure your loved one gets the best care possible, okay? That's how we do it through our life care planning model. On the legal front, we're looking at protection, and that's going to be estate planning, and that's going to be through asset protection. When I say estate planning, that's our wills and our durable modified powers of attorney. Not getting into, don't have the time to get into it right now, but a power of attorney that is durable and modified is worth its weight in gold, all right? Keeps the family out of court. So planning, healthcare advance directives, asset protection, that's going to be the irrevocable trusts more than likely. Very, very flexible, very comprehensive, built-in contingencies. And some people might cringe at the word irrevocable. They're not that irrevocable, okay? They are built enough, they're irrevocable enough to protect, but there is still flexibility and security for the parents and the clients. When we look at the financial part, as I shared, the goal is to get the care paid for. That's either through community Medicaid or nursing home Medicaid, what's called chronic care Medicaid. And then again, uniquely, when we're focusing on the care and getting the best care for your loved one, the way we do that is what we call our elder care coordinators. We have a registered nurse on staff, we have a geriatric social worker on staff, and we have a case manager. So one of them comes alongside your family to help during this entire process and perhaps for the balance of your loved one's life. When you look at a traditional elder law firm, the legal and the financial part, the protection, the trust, the wills, the powers of attorney, and the Medicaid work, you have good quality elder law firms out there that can do that. But you'll notice the care is off to the side because that's still on the family. What's unique about us is that we provide this level of life care planning where we're also involved with the care advocacy. So literally, we're helping take that stress and that care aspect off of your shoulders. While we pursue Medicaid, right? And the good and the bad and the ugly of it all. So that's it for today. I'm happy to answer any questions, chat or Q&A box. You can email me directly, brian@tullylawgroup.com. Our phone number is 631-424-2800. Tullylawgroup.com is our website. And you can, again, we have a lot of information on there. We do provide free consultations. And I'm grateful you spent the time with us. Let me see if we have any questions or and so forth. All right, so we don't have any questions. That's fine. All right, we had a good turnout today, so thank you very much. Where are we? Good. So thank you very much, and we hope to see you soon. See you next time.